Margaret, I have to ask you, how are we going to look back at this moment yesterday where we saw such a lineup of tech leaders and billionaires at the inauguration seated so prominently?
Well, it was really extraordinary. I mean, it remains to be seen how the relationship between tech and the Trump administration will evolve over time. But we have never in American history seen a lineup of business tycoons occupying a place of honor at a presidential inauguration like we did yesterday. Silicon Valley has long had ties with Washington in different presidential administrations, but this does feel like uncharted territory.
And how does this translate into the priority list that each of these CEOs may be bringing to the administration? How much does that proximity count?
It counts a lot. And look, we've seen Silicon Valley leaders have very close relationships with the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, with other administrations other than Trump. So this, again, is not entirely unknown, but there are really high stakes, and we see both in on the regulatory side and in the spending and tax policy side. On the regulatory side, the promise to have a light hand on AI regulation, as well as Trump's boosting of crypto, underscored by his and the First Lady's personal involvement in issuance of their own coins in the last couple of days, is something that is a real sea change for the industry, a real difference in attitude than what the Biden administration had approached. And then also, we have the promise of tax policy being corporate friendly generally, and also things like defense contracting, which is, the Defense Department and the national security establishment does a lot of business with Silicon Valley companies, and that only seems poised to increase.
Margaret, take us back from a historical perspective. Have there been as many ethical questions when we've seen such relationships, perhaps not so flamboyantly demonstrated, but certainly close in previous administrations?
There haven't. Well, there have been questions, but they have been resolved. And let me point to a really interesting example from Silicon Valley's past. David Packard, the founder of Hewlett-Packard, now HP, kind of a legendary Silicon Valley founder. He actually joined the Nixon administration as Deputy Secretary of Defense in 1969, and he was a very wealthy man. And he famously put his wealth in a blind trust while he was in office to resolve any ethical questions there might be about HP profiting from defense contracts, which it did have, while he was at the Defense Department.
Let's just, thinking of what you've written, in particular, the code Silicon Valley and the remaking of America, is Silicon Valley, are the tech leaders that we see remaking America from a political perspective right now, Margaret? I say that with the words of the previous administration still ringing on our ears, that this is some sort of oligarchy.
Yeah, I think that they are trying to. I mean, what certainly is the case, and hasn't been the case in the past, is that the platforms that they control just thinks, solely about the people who were on the inaugural dais yesterday in the Capitol Rotunda: Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. That they have such an outsized influence over online communication, on online commerce, that there already is such an immense consolidation of power that, again, there have been, big power structures and successful companies in the Valley before, but this is a next level. The influence is tremendous.
Margaret, last question, 30 seconds. These companies have a position to shape history as we will be reading it later. Talk about that unique role.
They do, just as the history textbooks now have Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller in them, and people around the world know those names. But, regardless of what happens next, a century from now, probably people are going to be reading about Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And I think with great power comes great responsibility. This is part of the criticism that has been levied at tech over the last decade about what the ripple effects of their platforms might be. Now, again, these are businesses. These are people in the, these are for-profit companies. And I think there also is a very important public sector, government regulatory role that has been absent. So that's one of the reasons that they have become this large. So I think it needs to be a balance, and we need to think more broadly about how this shakes out.